Oh boy, here we go, because we've got to talk about SIA'S recently released controversial directorial musical debut, simply called Music. Now, for those of you who are like me and have been living under a rock with your Star Trek Blu-rays for the past few years, Sia is a famous Australian singer-songwriter whose latest movie, Music, which is a movie about a nonverbal young woman on the autistic spectrum, has received a ton of criticism from the autistic community over its depiction of autism, as well as Sia's response to that criticism. And upon the film's release, the film critically bombed, with it getting an even worse review score on Rotten Tomatoes than the 2019 musical magnum opus Cats, which, gotta be honest, is quite the achievement. I mean, Sia's movie didn't even have a secret butthole cut. But speaking of achievements though, even more baffling, despite the controversy and critical failure of the film, Music was nominated for Best Musical Film at the 2021 Golden Globes, which at the time of this video going up will be airing this upcoming weekend. By that logic, Rebel Wilson deserves an Oscar for her role in Cats, which, actually, given how hard she worked, I'm actually not against that. Even if we consider that the Golden Globes are kind of a joke award and everyone knows it, Music's nomination and possibility of winning the Golden Globe could be indicative of further award success for the film, so it's rather shocking that such a panned film received such accolades. So considering the very wide spectrum of reception on this film, and given that I myself am on the autism spectrum and have done several videos on this channel about that topic, I wanted to look into the issues around Music and actually watch it to see how I felt about it, to try and give a nuanced take on if this film is really a problematic depiction of people on the autism spectrum or not. And now that I've actually seen the film, I have many thoughts on it. So for this video, I want to go over the specific issues and controversies that came up around this film, as well as go over what the actual problems within the film are, because I do think that there are problems within the film. But I also want to use Music as sort of a jumping off point to talk about larger issues that are indicative when it comes to representing autistic people and really any minority community in works like this that get such critical reception at things like the Golden Globes. How constantly, when creators like Sia, who go into their work even with the best of intentions to try to help a community that they are not a part of and try to represent them, continually fall into the same tropes and traps that get reinforced and rewarded by Hollywood and larger society, but still actually end up leading to harm against the very communities that they are trying to help and represent. And don't worry, I will even throw a little bit about Star Trek into this conversation because I know my audience. So before we get into the larger conversation of why representations of minority communities like those we see in Music constantly run into the same problems, we need to talk about this film specifically, as well as the controversy surrounding it, as well as Sia's own intentions in making the movie and her own controversial responses to said criticism. Sia decided to make Music after gaining confidence directing her 2014 music video, Chandelier, wanting to take what she learned from directing that music video and put it into an actual feature film. Sia decided to base her feature film debut, which follows the story of a nonverbal autistic girl who is forced to live with her sister, who has no idea how to care for an autistic child, on a neuroatypical friend of hers in real life who, quote, found it too stressful being nonverbal, and I made this movie with nothing but love for him and his mother. To make the film, Sia claimed that she did over 3 years of research into autism and the autism community, with several advisors from the community working on the film. However, the criticism surrounding the film started coming before the film was even out, because after the trailer for the movie dropped in November 2020, numerous autism advocacy groups and members of the autistic community criticized Sia for casting Maddie Ziegler in the lead role of the nonverbal autistic character, due to the fact that Ziegler is not herself autistic. Obviously, the conversation of if actors are allowed to portray identities outside of their own has been a long and storied one going back to the beginning of Hollywood, but especially has been prominent recently, even outside of the autistic community. For example, there have been numerous controversies surrounding when cisgender, i.e. non-transgender, actors are cast to play transgender characters, for example, as was the case with the controversy surrounding Scarlett Johansson and Halle Berry. And the reasons surrounding these types of controversies and criticisms constantly coming up are generally centered around two issues. The first being that by not casting actors from a background that the characters are from, it can lead to portrayals of these characters to come across as inauthentic or even as mocking of the community of which they are based on, even if that wasn't the intention. Because the actor doesn't have the lived experience of being from that community, so their portrayal may be heightened or attenuate characteristics of a community, or even characteristics of a community that are based in stereotypes rather than in reality. Now, any actors who are cast in these types of roles that don't match their identity generally push back against this criticism, because obviously and understandably, it's an actor's job to do the research to try and portray the experience of someone who is not them. So being a good actor means being able to portray experiences outside of your own. I mean, Sia herself even said this about the film. In an interview, she said, quote, "She, Maddie, had researched her role for 2 years. We watched movies together and I taught her the nuances and tics I had observed from a friend with autism. We did this in the most sensitive and respectful way." Now, it might be a little bit concerning that Sia and Maddie, who are both not autistic, are trying to teach each other the tics of autism, but generally the idea of studying people from a community in order to properly portray them makes sense, right, if you're an actor. But what more often happens is what occurs in Maddie's performance in the actual film music. Throughout the film, Maddie, who is again not autistic in real life, comes across as portraying a caricature of autistic body movements, often known as stimming, which is where someone repeats body movements, sounds, or words, often in response to heightened emotions or stimulation. All autistic people experience autistic symptoms in different ways, and they can vary across different identities, genders, and more. Some autistic folks may not stim at all, while some may have much more violent stimming behavior. To use an example from my own life, when I personally get really excited, I often, without even consciously realizing it, will seize up my whole body and will have some tremors, especially in my arms, for a few seconds. And this was much more exaggerated when I was younger and I was less self-aware of it. I've also had other friends who will just repeat words at the end of sentences without even realizing it. Others still may have more pronounced and disruptive symptoms, like those that Maddie is attempting to portray in music. But Maddie's performance comes across, like I said, as a caricature and inauthentic. This isn't to say that there aren't people in the autistic community whose symptoms manifest in a similar way to Maddie's, but Maddie's movements are heightened and over the top throughout the entire film. It's almost like a cartoon, and it's made even worse by the fact that we as the audience are clearly aware that Maddie is only performing these actions because she doesn't experience them in real life. She doesn't actually stim. Now, this kind of portrayal perpetuates stereotypes of autistic folks and how we actually exist in the real world, and again can come across as mocking, even if that's not the intention. For example, many autistic folks who experienced stimming who saw music said that they felt ashamed in their own personal body movements after watching the film, that it was seen as something negative or bad about them or something to make fun of. And this is a common feeling for folks in the autistic community even outside of when they watch movies like music. To give you another personal example from my own life, when I was younger, my friends and even family who didn't realize that what I was doing was voluntary when I would get excited and kind of have those tremors would often make fun of me or even physically mock my excited movements. And that made me feel really ashamed, so much so that I really tried actively not to do it, but again, it's an unconscious thing. It's just something I did without thinking whenever I got excited. So how do you feel that whenever you have a positive emotion, excitement, that you immediately feel shame and have to try and change something about yourself? It really just stamps down on you wanting to feel excitement in the first place, the feeling that sort of starts off this behavior. And it can become really, really harmful down the line. So the cartoonish mimicking that Maddie does in the film touches upon very real insecurities that autistic people can have when people attempt to recreate or make fun of or try to do versions of our stimming behavior. But even more so, the film constantly portrays Maddie's stimming movements as a negative thing, something that she should be afraid of and that causes problems for other people in her life. For example, when we see glimpses into Maddie's internal headspace, which are shown through music videos that occur throughout the film, Maddie's stimming gets less pronounced, and she's able to actually express herself in different ways, showing that the film sees that the ideal version of Maddie when she's in her head is without these physical movements, without these stimming behaviors. The film is sort of subtly saying that there's a normal version of Maddie that is buried underneath all these other actions that she had, instead of just taking her as the person that she exists as in the real world. The Maddie that exists in the real world of the film is indirectly hinted at being a lesser version of who she could be, instead of just taking her as who she is. Again, this mirrors this common stereotype that autism is this thing that is a problem with somebody that we can cure, that we can fix, instead of it actually just being a part of who people are. By subtly hinting this within the movie, it becomes a value judgment, instead of taking our characteristics as something about ourselves that may or may not cause us problems in interacting with the world, yes, but are just part of who we are. Honestly, as I've gotten older, I don't mind that I have that stimming behavior whenever I get excited. It's just honestly something that I like about myself. It's something endearing about myself. Not every autistic person likes their stimming behavior or is okay with their stimming behavior, but it is just part of who we are and doesn't necessarily need to be cured, only dealt with or helped alleviated if it causes us problems in our real life, which again, does not have to be the case with every single autistic person. But again, it subtly hints that there is a better version of ourselves, and that can make us feel bad that we aren't the ideal versions of ourselves. We should be just taking people as they are. This gets us into the next issue with the film, however, and this is something that happened behind the scenes of the film, because apparently this issue with possibly mischaracterizing or mocking autistic people was something that the actress Maddie herself was concerned about when she was filming music.
I know that Maddie was concerned about playing a character that is on the autism spectrum. How did you convince her that this casting was a good thing?
Well, she cried on the first day of rehearsals and she was really scared, and she just said, I don't want anyone to think that I'm making fun of them. And I bold-facedly said, I won't let that happen.
The actress was concerned that she would not be able to portray this community correctly. So much so that she cried on set, and Sia had to reassure her that she would protect her. It's interesting to say that Sia's concern was about protecting Maddie rather than making sure that Maddie was giving an authentic portrayal. She wasn't saying like, no, you're doing it correctly, you're doing it right, you're doing it the right way. No, she was saying that, oh, if people criticize you, she will protect her. Keep that in mind, because that's going to go to speak a little bit later to what Sia's intentions were, at least what we can assume Sia's intentions were with making this film. But this also presents us with another issue with the behind the scenes of this film, the power dynamic between Sia and Maddie. Sia is a grown woman, and Maddie was 14 at the time of this movie's filming. Not only that, but Sia, who has frequently collaborated with Maddie since she was 12 years old, was a huge part of the reason for Maddie's successful career. There's a huge power imbalance and influence that Sia has on Maddie, and even and perhaps especially if Maddie views her as the parental figure that Sia constantly claims that she is in numerous interviews. And so this situation of Maddie feeling upset that she may not be able to portray autistic people authentically, and Sia saying that you should, you can keep going, you can do it anyways, it comes across as many ways as Sia forcing or at least influencing unduly a girl to portray an identity that she did not feel comfortable that she could accurately portray. And I should say, I don't think that actors always need to 100% align with the identity that they're playing, but it certainly helps in making it feel authentic. But it can be done even if you're not part of that community. There are many transgender roles, for example, played by cisgender people that I really love and look up to. But if Maddie, in the moment, did not feel comfortable playing this role, she should not have been pushed to do it. Not only because it hurts Maddie's career, which, given the fact that Maddie has faced criticism and even harassment for her portrayal in this movie, which, by the way, Maddie should not be getting harassment, by the way, it can also reinforce the shame and stereotypes of autistic people, as we talked about before, because it's not coming across as authentic and relaxed and natural for the actor to do it. And Sia's statement that she could protect Maddie, like I said, is blatantly false, something that Sia herself admits to.
And I bold-facedly said, I won't let that happen. And last week I realized I couldn't really protect her from that. I thought I could.
It's why I lay the entirety of the criticisms for this specific issue on Sia, not Maddie herself. Though, by the way, like I said, neither of them, neither Sia nor Maddie, should face harassment. Criticism, yes. Harassment, no. But this gets us into the second issue surrounding casting non-autistic actors for autistic roles, and this is a very real-world issue. It reinforces this false idea that autistic actors and folks can portray or act in our own stories on screen and portray our own stories in a moving and realistic way. This is a stereotype that Sia herself perpetuated. When Sia was asked why she didn't cast a neuroatypical actor in the role, she stated that she actually had cast a neuroatypical actor initially. Now, this situation is completely understandable. There are some neuroatypical folks who will not feel comfortable in acting in a film, will feel once they get on set, once all the lights and people are there, that they can't do it and will have a breakdown. And it is compassionate, as Sia said, to not force them to act through that situation. But given that there are still dozens and dozens upon hundreds upon thousands of autistic actors who can and are willing to act in a big budget movie like SIA'S would, and would have loved the opportunity to be in this film. But when an autistic actor pointed this out to SIA online, SIA's response to that actor was, quote, "Maybe you're a bad actor." Which is certainly a take, especially a take on an actor that you've never met. So what this all means and indicates to me is, not only did SIA fail to cast an autistic person when it's clear by the fact that she had initially done so, that she knew the importance of actually doing that, not only did she force a non-autistic actor to portray characteristics of autistic people that made that actor uncomfortable, she also then went on to insult autistic actors for kindly but firmly pointing out issues that she admits she herself was aware of. And SIA, who is a big name in pop culture, using her platform to insult autistic actors this way furthers the discrimination against autistic actors, furthering stigmatization of them that they're not good enough to portray leading roles in films about ourselves, despite the fact that we're so rarely given the chance to prove that in the first place. Even further though, moving beyond this issue, SIA was also criticized for working with the autistic advocacy group Autism Speaks on the film. Autism Speaks is an incredibly controversial organization within the autistic community, often being called out for only spending 4% of its budget on actually helping individuals with autism with grants, while alternatively spending 22% of its budget on fundraising efforts and paying its CEO a ton of money. Not only that, it seeks to end and cure autism, something that, as I talked about before, people argue isn't even possible or even desirable, as autistic people are just ourselves and don't need to be cured of our autism, only acknowledge where our autism helps us and hurts us and defines us, as any other person with their own personal struggles would. Autism Speaks has also been accused of portraying autism as something scary or harmful, like in their horrific ad, "I am autism."
I work faster than pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. And if you are happily married, I will make sure that your marriage fails. Your money will fall into my hands, and I will bankrupt you for my own self-gain. I don't sleep, so I make sure you don't either. I will make it virtually impossible for your family to easily attend a temple, a birthday party, a public park, without a struggle, without embarrassment, without pain.
However, the point is not to go after Autism Speaks here, because some people do like it and some people do benefit from the work that Autism Speaks does, so I'm not here to definitively say that you should hate or like Autism Speaks. But the point that I want to make in this video is that when these issues were pointed out to SIA, she said this: "Autism Speaks came on board long after the film was finished, 4 years in fact. I had no idea it was such a polarizing group." Again, like I said, I'm not here to rule on whether or not SIA should be working with Autism Speaks. As I said, it's a controversial organization even within the autistic community. But what I am saying, and what is more germane to this discussion, is the fact that SIA openly admitted to not being aware that the organization was controversial. Considering that she claims that she did 3 years of research on the autistic community before making this film, it's rather shocking that she wasn't aware of such a high-profile issue with a group that she was directly working with on the film. It speaks to perhaps the lack of depth her research actually had. And I actually learned after filming this part of the video that SIA had apparently been informed that Autism Speaks was a very controversial organization months before she tweeted out that she didn't know that fact. So she just straight up lied, which is, not great. It's also well worth mentioning, though I am not the best person to break this down, that the film has also been accused of blackface, given that Maddie has done skin darkening makeup throughout the film to help darken her skin. I am not the best person to break that down, as number one, I am not black, and number two, in my specific research of this film, I could not find anything specifically from SIA or Maddie or anyone else about the use of that makeup throughout the film, so I've linked down in the down below some videos that talk about that issue more specifically from people who will know much more about it than I and can talk much more authoritatively about that specific criticism within the film. And we can keep going with issues with the film. For example, the film repeatedly features strobing lights and overstimulating visuals, as you can see here. Now, this is a problem with the film because there is a large overlap with those in the autistic community and those with light sensitivity, some people who can even have seizures for being sensitive to light. For example, on a much smaller level, besides just having a seizure, fluorescent light can be hard for autistic folks to deal with because we can see it's flickering more readily. We are more susceptible to noticing that flickering. I myself experience this a lot. Whenever I go into a room with fluorescent lights, I can't really pay attention. Again, this is a bigger problem when I was younger. I also can't sleep well in a room that doesn't have room darkening curtains, for example. If there's any light that comes into my room, I literally cannot sleep. Now, to be clear, this isn't to say that films can't have hyperstimulating visuals or light-sensitive moments like this, but it speaks to the fact that music was clearly not made with autistic people being able to watch it safely in mind, which is incredibly weird considering that this movie is about autistic people. Autistic people will probably want to see movies about ourselves and actually be able to talk and criticize it, but we can't do so safely because of these visuals. It speaks to the fact that Sia probably didn't even consider at all that autistic people would be interested in her film, and maybe didn't even consider that the audience of her movie might include autistic people. And it goes to speak to the very thing that I'm going to be talking about towards the end of this video, about who was this movie made for. Definitely was not autistic people though, as this clearly shows. This is made even clearer though in the film because there is a scene in the released version of the movie where a character goes to restrain Maddie's character music when she's having a violent stimming episode.
Oh God.
Music.
No, do that thing.
I'm not climbing on top of a small screaming white girl in the middle of this park. It's your turn.
My turn.
You can do this. I'll talk you through it. Go ahead.
I can't. Okay, music, it's okay. Ouch. She's hitting me.
She doesn't know who she is hitting.
Okay, stop.
Hold her tight. Squeeze her like a bear.
Okay. Shh.
Hold her.
And this is a really horrible practice for the film to portray, because it is something that happens in the real world and causes real harm to people in the autistic community. Often, autistic people are restrained against their will during episodes like this, or sometimes they're just left in a secluded place with no one to care for them, and it leads to injuries, trauma, or even death. And this type of treatment leads to autistic people being seen as objects, not actual human beings, just something that can be dealt with or tossed away. And for Sia to show that type of objectification in her film continually shows how little she actually viewed autistic people as actual people when she was making this film. Instead, we are treated like props as something that she can use to make her film, instead of being something that she is authentically trying to portray in the film. And I don't say that criticism lightly. I'm not saying it just to be hyperbolic because this is YouTube. Believe me, I went into watching and researching this film with the hope that I would be able to give Sia the benefit of the doubt. But then I find moments like this interview.
Here's this person who can't speak. You know, she might as well be like an inanimate object like a wig, except there's so much going on in there. Yeah. So sorry if
Sia nods along as the interviewer praises Sia, comparing autistic folks to lamps, and how Sia managed to showcase themselves to make autistic people feel like real people. And Sia just nods away. This comparison is something that Sia is approving of, basically saying that autistic people, as we exist in the real world, are just objects to be taken care of, that we aren't people but things, and that Sia is our rescuer. Because you see, for Sia, this film was not made to help autistic people, but was made to be her issue film. She's making this film to try and have a message about autistic people, rather than saying something about autistic people authentically, to try to represent autistic people. It's about her. In her directorial debut, she wanted to make a statement. So she wanted to say something meaningful and get the credit for it, and that's the important part. She wanted to be recognized with accolades and praise for saying something that was so helpful to a very marginalized community. And that was something that she got, by the way, considering her film has been nominated for that Golden Globe. She's using autistic people as props, as symbols for her to showcase how good a person she is, and she gets rewarded for it. Something that Hollywood all too often does, reward this kind of issue film, patting itself on the back for doing the good job of helping people with their media, without actually doing the work to actually include those people or benefit those people with the actual work that they're making. It's benefiting the people who make the movie rather than the people who the movie is about. And by the way, I'm using Hollywood as a really broad term here. I'm not saying that every single Hollywood production or award show does this, nor am I saying that symbolic gestures are necessarily a bad thing. I mean, in many ways, all of Hollywood and any work of art or TV or movie, they're all symbolic gestures. That's all they are. But these symbols have to be inclusive of the voices of which they are representing in order for that art to feel authentic rather than shallowly symbolic. But Hollywood, as a general rule, would rather have the clout of having made meaningful work and be rewarded for it, rather than actually producing work that is actually helpful to the communities it's representing. It's not to say that it can't produce work that is meaningful, inclusive, and helpful to those communities, but that's a secondary concern to appearing to do so. The appearance is more important, rather than actually doing the work. And by the way, if this sounds like I'm talking about virtue signaling, yes, that is what I'm talking about, but don't get me wrong. Many people who talk about virtue signaling often are subtly implying that the virtues being signaled are bad things. For example, when a TV show announces that they are including transgender characters in their show, some specific corners of the internet, let's just say, will yell virtue signaling, and that is actually kind of true. Maybe it is just the show including trans characters in order to get the accolades or clout or word of mouth out there, and it didn't actually cast transgender actors in the role, or didn't hire transgender writers or actors, or didn't do the work to try to represent these transgender characters authentically. But while these critics may have correctly diagnosed a symptom that virtue signaling was a problem, they often take away the wrong root problem. They will say something like trans people shouldn't be included because it's virtue signaling. But in fact, it's actually just the opposite. We should be using media to help others understand marginalized communities. But often, such actual understanding only comes from being inclusive, which often does not happen when someone is virtue signaling. It can happen, I'm not saying it doesn't, but it often does not. People will slap transgender characters into something and not actually do the work of understanding what writing and presenting a transgender character actually means. And just assuming you can write these types of characters without truly understanding what it means to be a part of these communities leads to perpetuating harmful stereotypes, as we've talked about with music and the autistic community. But we can see a similar mindset of symbolism over actual inclusivity with the film Music. For example, Maddie's character is literally named Music, and her autism and inner voice is portrayed through music videos throughout the movie. Music and music videos are things that Sia herself is primarily interested in. Now, I'm not saying that Sia can't have her own authoritative stamp and voice on a work of art. That's why we make art. But the fact that Sia associates music's autism with things that Sia herself views as something worthy about herself, things that she primarily views as worthwhile about herself, means that she's linking autism with Sia's own individual worth. Autism becomes representative of Sia, not representative of autism. And the rest of how this character is portrayed throughout the film, from her stereotypical movements to how she is actually written throughout the film, showcase that this character is meant to become a symbol of something else rather than authentically representing the autistic community. Let me give you an example of what I mean of symbolic versus authentic representation. And again, I get to bring Star Trek into this because that's who I am. Because I have praised in other videos that I've done on autism on this channel a little film called Please Stand By, which is another movie about an autistic character, this time being played by Dakota Fanning. Fanning in this film plays an autistic Trekkie who lives in a care shelter and feels distance from her sister, who finds caring for her overwhelming and who doesn't connect with her. When Dakota's character gets a chance to submit a Star Trek script to a contest at Paramount, she escapes her caregiving facility and her sister's influence to go on a road trip that she is unprepared for to put in her submission in Los Angeles, causing her sister and caregivers to have to chase after her. It's a fun coming-of-age film that uses Star Trek and a road trip story to spin an interesting yarn about a specific autistic character. When we look at Please Stand By at a surface level, there isn't a ton that actually distinguishes it from the criticisms pointed at music. Dakota Fanning, just like Maddie, isn't autistic either, for example.
The film also does show a scene of Dakota Fanning's character being restrained, which is a problem with both films. The plots of both films aren't that dissimilar either. Both films revolve around an autistic girl finding connection with their estranged sister, who starts off the film not understanding their autism.
But the difference between Music and Please Stand By is that unlike the cartoonish, stereotypical symbol that Maddie's character becomes in Music, Dakota Fanning's character comes across as a specific person, a specific individual with her own needs and wants.
My everyday schedule. Wake up, make bed, get towel and toiletries. If my towel smells funny, put it in the hamper and get a new towel. Go into bathroom.
While certainly we can discuss the issues that face autistic people as a whole through her specific character, her issues and needs in the film are specific to her. Her love of Star Trek, for example, is a hyper-specific detail about her as a specific person, and it makes her feel more human. When it comes to representing any community in a work of art, universality actually exists within the specific, not in the broadly symbolic. Ironically, the more specific a portrayal of a character is, the more human that character becomes to feel, and the more we as audiences, somewhat paradoxically, are able to read and understand specific representations. We are able to empathize more specifically rather than with someone who is playing a broad-based symbol. Every single person on the autistic spectrum displays their autism in ways that are unique to them. No two autistic people are exactly alike. So it is actually a failed endeavor to try and represent the entirety of the autism spectrum within a single character. By focusing in specifically on one character, you're able to give us a better understanding of what it means to have autism, because you can deal with specific issues and problems and make us understand them. And by the way, it's not uncoincidental that this was exactly what Dakota Fanning's takeaway was when she was making the film.
I think what I learned about autism first and foremost was that every person's experience with autism is different. I think that, a big saying in the autism community is that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, that everyone's struggles and challenges are individual and specific, and that everyone's different. And so that as an actor, I felt a lot of freedom to create Wendy, and that I didn't have to. I think there are certain sort of stereotypes that we hear about autism, and I learned very quickly through meeting people who either were parents of autistic children or meeting people with autism that those sort of stereotypes aren't really, I didn't find them to really exist. And so I felt that I didn't want to further the stereotypes, and that I wanted to really portray her as I would portray any other young woman.
This was a deliberate choice by the screenwriter of Please Stand By, who adapted the film from his own play. Quote, "We wanted people to think of Wendy as an individual, not as a member of a class of people sharing a diagnosis." And that is the distinguisher between Please Stand By and music. Music is meant to be a symbolic representation of all autistic people. But autistic people's needs and circumstances vary wildly from person to person. How every single person's autistic characteristics are different from their age group, their gender, and their identity. And this is why, as I spoke about in my video on representations of autism in Star Trek, that autistic folks are often better able to see ourselves in characters that weren't intended to represent the autistic community. Because such portrayals will often avoid these harmful stereotypes and attempts to symbolically represent an entire community. Data, for example, on Star Trek The Next Generation, was created as an android character, but many of his characteristics are similar to those of autistic people. It caused Brent Spiner, the actor portraying Data, to lean into traits specific to his character of Data, not leaning into pretending to be an autistic portrayal, a cartoonish version of all people who have autism. So it comes across as real and intentional, rather than cartoonish and symbolic. Brent Spiner himself reiterated this in an interview just this year.
I had no idea while we were doing this series that it was the character was speaking to so many young people, particularly at that time, who were struggling with emotion and expression. And I'm glad that I didn't know about it too much at the time, because I think I would have pushed the writers to address it more head on, and it could have ruined the entire thing.
And this specificity in Fanny's character Wendy showcases that the film Please Stand By is trying to get us as the audience to empathize specifically with Wendy in the movie. Wendy, while appearing to be emotionless, uses Star Trek specifically to express her emotions because she connects with the character of Spock, who appears to be emotionless in that show, but does have them under the surface, as Wendy points out.
And one of them, Spock, who's a Vulcan, he discovers how to have a sense of humor. He makes a special study of the anatomy of jokes, which were a part of old or primitive Vulcan culture. He relates different parts of a joke to different facial expressions according to old holographic archives. And he figures out a scientific equation for a sense of humor.
Wendy expresses and understands herself on her own terms through something specific like Star Trek. And this is something at the start of the film that the people around her don't realize is her specific way of connecting to them and to the world.
In my script, Spock travels back and forth through time to save the Federation.
Well, sounds fascinating.
Towards the end, there are a few passages in the Klingon language, but don't worry, there will be subtitles.
Good to know.
And so as a result of people not understanding how she sees the world through the prism of Star Trek, she feels isolated.
But why does she find it so fascinating? That's what I don't get.
I don't know, maybe it's the characters.
What do you mean?
Like Spock, for example, he's half human, half alien. He has trouble dealing with his emotions.
Where did it say that?
It's just how he is.
The only time that Wendy is able to connect with other people is through Star Trek, like when she meets police officer Patton Oswalt, who is able to calm her down by speaking Klingon to her.
Nitab, Kob, Chabe, Souffle.
And yes, while it is somewhat outside the realm of this essay, there is something to be said about the use of police in this film, specifically in how they almost shoot Wendy until Officer Oswalt realizes how to calm her down, something that probably would not have happened if Wendy had been a black autistic girl screaming in the streets. But again, that's a bit outside the bounds of this essay, but well worth mentioning. But by the end of the film, Wendy's sister comes to understand Wendy through her connection to Star Trek by realizing that Trek is how Wendy expresses herself and understands the world in her own unique way. It allows both of these sisters to connect, and Wendy's sister to understand her on her own terms as who she is, instead of trying to force Wendy to communicate in a way that makes her uncomfortable. Wendy's sister meets Wendy where she is, and we, the audience watching the film, are supposed to empathize with Wendy finally getting to express herself. We identify with her in the final moments of the movie, and the emotional catharsis is placed squarely on Wendy's arc of turning in the script, rather than on the sister.
Do you know how hard it is to write something? All the thinking and planning and rewriting of everything you already wrote for somebody else to read? All the nights and days spent thinking about the right words to say, thinking about the best way to say them. Because the story you want to tell means so much to you. All those people that wrote those scripts, somebody's going to read them. And I just want a chance. Just like everyone else got.
Now compare this to music. We aren't really made to empathize with Maddie's character of music because she's not really portrayed as a human character with specific needs and wants, nor does she really ever get to express herself in any specific ways to her like Wendy does through Star Trek. The only real expression of self that music gets throughout Sia's film is through the music videos that show music's inner life, which I've already mentioned are incredibly problematic because they show music being magically cured of her autism, something that is incredibly harmful. But even more so, the music video forms of expression aren't even unique to music. All the main characters in the movie express themselves through music videos. By doing this, it refuses to allow music to be expressing herself on her own terms as an autistic person. Rather, she is just one of many people who have their inner lives displayed by Sia music videos, apparently. And thus we aren't made to engage with music as a specific character. Instead, the character that we are meant to empathize as the audience in this film is music's sister, Kazoo, which, by the way, is a really weird name. But the whole movie is about Kazoo and how her life is disrupted by music coming into it, about how hard it is for her to understand music. And so the whole movie is just Kazoo going from scene to scene learning how to deal with music's autism. It comes across as like a string of PSA commercials about autism rather than actual unique characters.
The blue one goes on this side. I know that.
How do you know how to calm her down? How do you do that?
She sees the world in a completely different way from us.
The sooner you recognize the signs of autism, the sooner you can make a lifetime of difference for your child.
Hell, even the subplot love story and climax of the film is all about Kazoo, who breaks into a wedding and professes her love for this guy. Just in the two different climaxes of the film, we can see the distinct difference between the two. Wendy gets to have the emotional moment in Please Stand By, where in music is literally just standing off on the sidelines while Kazoo gets to kiss her guy. The person whose name of the film and who supposedly this movie should be focusing on isn't even part of the emotional moment at the end of the movie. The person that we're supposed to connect to and feel emotion for at the end of the film is Kazoo, about how good we should feel that she learned to finally take care of music. What a hero she is for doing the bare minimum of responsibility and making sure another human being is kept alive and happy. The film wants us to pat Kazoo on the back, and music and her autism become the symbolic props that make us feel that way. Now, don't get me wrong, Please Stand By is by no means a perfect film, and I'm not trying to hold it up as a pinnacle of autistic representation. For example, while I like Fanning's portrayal better here than Maddie's in music, I would still have preferred an autistic person to have portrayed the lead character. But it's certainly much better than music because it is a specific character, not a symbolic one. And besides, no one representation of a community or identity is ever going to be able to accurately portray everything about that community or identity. In fact, it shouldn't. We need a variety of characters to represent the variety of people who exist within a certain community. So to set out to make an issue film that attempts to broadly showcase a community like SIA'S music did is doomed from the onset and pushes mockery and stereotypes of a community rather than showcasing us on a human level. And this is made even worse by SIA'S doubling down on her own mistakes when she was faced with good faith criticisms that expressed exactly these sentiments. The fact that she gets so self-defensive about the movie goes to show how much of SIA'S own ego was being put into the film, rather than it being about helping autistic folks. It was about helping SIA'S career instead. And we see this by the fact that SIA has apologized 3 times for this film. She apologized once after the initial controversy surrounding Maddie's casting. She did it a second time after the controversy surrounding the use of restraints became known, during which she said, by the way, in that apology, that those scenes would be removed from the film and a warning would be placed at the front of every screening of the movie, which by the time of this video's filming, this still has not happened. So people who watch the film when it releases, which most people who will watch the film are, will get those harmful scenes reinforced and shown to them. And SIA apologized a 3rd time for the film after the film got nominated for a Golden Globe. This is not how apologies work, SIA. You don't get to apologize over and over and over again, all while reaping the financial and critical benefits of releasing the movie. That's not how apologies work. You apologize, and then you have to actually work to fix or attempt to mitigate the harm that you caused. And doing that would mean that you have to remove the scenes that are harmful immediately, and definitely don't submit the movie for awards, and if possible, don't even release the movie at all. Though I understand that that last one's a little bit harder. But all that's considering that you should have not made this movie in the first place to begin with. But no, she just apologizes to try to shield herself from the criticism and reaps the benefits anyways. And all of this is even more anger-inducing by Hollywood's desire to continually pat itself on the back by rewarding films that do the bare minimum. Hollywood says, hey look, this film did a good job, or at least it says it did, and aren't we good too because we're rewarding it with our globes of gold? This isn't just problematic and arrogant, it causes more harm. This movie winning awards and getting highlighted at the Golden Globes means that more people will be interested in seeing it, meaning they'll have the stereotypes about autistic people in the film reinforced when they watch it. But even worse, it encourages autistic people who criticize the film to be ignored or even harassed. People will look at this film's acclaim and think that the people who speak out against it are just being unrealistic, overly critical, ridiculous, or mean because they don't understand or they don't have full context or they're just being too sensitive. When critics from minority communities speak out against how their communities are represented in film, they constantly get pushback and even harassment and insulting behavior from people saying like, you don't understand, you're being too demanding, you're being too unrealistic in what you want from a film, just enjoy it, just accept it. Just take it. Just take what we give you. Take the scraps of what you're able to get on film. And I do not accept that because films like this perpetuate harmful representation of communities like the autistic community. It further stigmatizes and harms the autistic community in very, very real ways. And by the way, I should say I don't speak for all autistic people. Some autistic people may see themselves in music, and that's actually okay. I'm not here to tell you where you find your representation or how to feel about it. I myself see myself in many different problematic representations of trans or autistic people in other films. But I do find that this film on a whole and the response to it by its creator are incredibly, incredibly harmful and will lead to more harm and perpetuating harmful actions against the autistic community. So in the end, I want to be clear.
I'm not saying that Sia is a bad person. I'm not saying that she went into this film trying to be harmful. But on almost every single level, she failed to be an actual ally to the community. She failed to listen. She failed to learn because it was more about herself. Sia claimed that she went into this movie to finally give nonverbal autistic people a voice. But instead, she just replaced it with her own. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said, I was trying to be as generous to Sia as I could, but ultimately by the time I finished researching the film and looking into the film and actually watching the film, I just could not take this film as something that was helpful or even a general good thing. Like I said, there can be good things in it. Some people may see themselves represented in this film. Some people may take away good lessons about the film that autistic people need to be helped, but overall I think it really is just harmful in the specifics about the autistic community. But I'd love to hear what you think about this. Did you like music? Did you hate music? I'd love to hear all that in the comments below. Don't forget, I also have a Patreon page if you want to support me doing these types of videos and talking about these types of issues. This takes a lot of work on my part to be able to make these kind of videos, so helping me out on Patreon really does mean a lot because it means I can devote more time and energy to making these videos because I am trying to do this full time by the end of the year. And also Patreon gets you yourself your own cool perks, like your name in videos and access to some cool live stream stuff that is exclusive to patrons and things like that. But beyond all of that, I thank you so much for just watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe and hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Patrons, you are my patrons. You are so awesome. So here are your names. Catherine Lambeth, Eli Berg Moss, Ashley Allen, Bo Kikio, Miranda Janelle, Ashlyn Solstice, Greg Gillim, Stephen Kleinard, Camille T, Randy Thompson, Stephen Schuhart, Boyd Earl, and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Wayne Twitchell, Rick Osborne, Roar, Ish the Mad, Piston Twisted Garage, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, John Steele, Michael Beam, Gavin Robinson, Carmen Olson, William Stewart, Amanda Ronya, Hannah F., Nathan Olson, Andrew Jorgensen, BBD, Jason Knott, Maeve, saying it twice because I can, Andrew K., Bree Beecher, Jasmine, Nathan Steele, Skylar Gray, Lily, Tiffany Danger, Sean Piper, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Bush, Jane Packard, Geek Filter, Mari Neckard, Jacob Tovar, Polymenia, Celestial Dawn, Jean Mithun, Sarah Bystam Din, Mark the Edge, Corey Honkinen, and Vale the Pale Dunn, Lysa, W. Randy Eady, Andrew Lamoureux, Zone 1 Librarian, and finally, Michael Hardy. I am sorry for that, but seriously, thank you so much, patrons. You really mean the world to me, and you really are changing my life, even if I may have changed your life for the worst with my singing. Thank you so much for all of your support.